This is the final video of the course. Well done for getting this far. We had left the topic of consciousness to last because it is in some respects the richest topic one could approach, but it is by no means easy to do so from a scientific point of view. And the questions that arise are not solely of interest to scientists, certainly not solely to cognitive scientists. Neuroscientists and psychologists, of course, have interests here. The philosophical tradition has a whole school known as phenomenology, mainly associated with such philosophers as Husserl and Merleau-Ponty and Heidegger and Sartre maybe. And these have taken the nature of experience as their topic, and they have traditionally had a difficult time interacting with science because it's been difficult to find an agreed framework with which to unpack these rich concepts. Psychiatrists likewise have urgent questions in this area and are in need of concepts that allow us to both make use of our scientific expertise, our capacity for classification, measurement, diagnostics, and so on, but also to acknowledge the complexity and richness of human experience and human suffering. Psychoanalysts are very, very interested in all this because they are concerned very much with the origins of and nature of experience, although the concepts they use are not necessarily well aligned with those of other disciplines. But nobody has the God's own truth here. There's been very interesting crossovers of late between certain aspects of Eastern philosophical traditions, in particular certain schools of Hinduism, the Vedantic schools, and some aspects of philosophical Buddhism. So let's call those contemplative traditions perhaps, because these traditions have sometimes several thousand years of experience in doing what we're doing here, which is trying to get the concepts right for talking about things that are very difficult to talk about, but that have to do with lived experience. What we've found recently is that there's been some fruitful interaction between scientists and people from these traditions, and indeed the Dalai Lama himself has worked together with neuroscientists in very interesting ways. Physicists might be assumed to be the scientists who are furthest away from such concerns, but in many respects physics is about that which is real, and if experience isn't real, then I just don't know where to start. There have been some physicists who have sought to understand physics within a frame that is sufficiently broad to accommodate consciousness. David Bohm is of particular interest here if you're interested in pursuing that. And of course, the nature of experience is sometimes best not analysed, but expressed, for example, through literature, poetry, music, dance, activity. Everyone's interested here. So it's here that we recognize that science is not a single undertaking, and that it doesn't simply do to say that, well, science has to provide us with an objective picture and that's our account of reality. The notion of objective and its contrasting notion of subjective, these are complex, multifaceted concepts. They are not simple, and they are often treated as if they were simple ideas in popular discourse. If we, for example, suggest that the descriptions of the physicists give us our objective hold on reality, consciousness is inherently subjective, then what we've said basically is that consciousness is not real or cannot be characterized as real. And I pull you back to your own experience right now. If your own experience right now is not real, what is real? So distinguishing the terms objective and subjective and mapping them onto reality and made up is not helpful at all. So the distinction between objective and subjective accounts or facets or features of reality is very, very rich, and it's not a simple distinction. Be careful there. If we were to rule the subjective out of bounds for scientific work, then we would make our science incapable of addressing the notions of suffering, meaning, value, and feeling. That is, all of the qualitative aspects of experience, everything that makes life worth living, would be unaddressable in a scientific context. Science has historically had difficulty in treating of such topics, and we've met many of those difficulties in this module. But the challenge is more than worthwhile. The module has only taken the lid off what is a very, very rich set of approaches. We have by no means explored all contemporary approaches. We have given a lion's share of attention to the popular but often misunderstood computational theory of mind, and the idea that consciousness and experience are products of brains. I want to alert you to the fact that we have mentioned and occasionally brought forth concerns from other traditions, including embodied cognitive science. And here is one of those areas where philosophical biology, contemplative traditions, philosophy, and science have really come together. These days, there are alternative frames available that see experience and consciousness, lived reality, not as a product of brains, but as coextensive with the notion of life. So here we've got biological, strongly biological approaches to many of the topics that we've addressed here. The book by Evan Thompson, Mind in Life, is one important contribution here. And such novel accounts of ourselves and the manner in which we are geared into the world seem to be very, very important in the current context of, well, our relations with viruses, how viruses interact with human behavior, human sociality and culture, and of course the pressing questions of climate change and the severe destruction wrought on the biosphere. There are challenges ahead that we can only dream of, but to address those we will need to understand not how we observe nature, but how we are within nature, how we are part of nature. Here's just a little snapshot of a selection of recent books from the area of embodied cognition that draw out many of these themes. They're there just as reading suggestions. So we left the theme of consciousness to the end because consciousness is not just another topic, and the manner in which we approach this may change the way that we understand who and what we are. I'm showing you the red pill, blue pill scene from the Matrix quite knowingly. We're only at the beginning of a big journey here. Now, in the context of this module, we have met some of the topics you would have expected, maybe some you weren't expecting. I've been very, very, very bad at providing answers, I must admit, and that is part of the field. These words like mind, thought, consciousness, perception, attention, and memory, those are all poorly defined words. And they are words which, if you're going to use them, it's necessary, use them in a scientific context at least, it's necessary to recognize how poorly defined they are and how much the way we use them depends on the context in which we use them and the discourse that we are conducting and what the other person with whom we are conversing assumes about these. Any discussion about anything has certain framing assumptions. We cannot converse unless we assume some things are real or taken for granted. We can make ourselves more aware than we typically are of those framing assumptions, and much of this module has been designed to do just that. To realize that when we talk in this way, using these kinds of words, we are making these assumptions, and those are optional assumptions and may not be shared in all other contexts. So I hope one thing that the module might have conveyed to you is that the very, very broad area addressed by cognitive science includes many kinds of conversations that combine many kinds of disciplines in which we learn to be fairly self-aware in our discourse. If the content of the course has interested you, we have in UCD, in University College Dublin, a 1-year, 12-month taught master's program in cognitive science, which is quite unique in the world. This has been designed as preparation for people who have some kind of a background, as you now have, in cognitive science, who are interested in perhaps going on to do research towards a PhD, but who wish to broaden their knowledge of the field and to adopt this kind of interdisciplinary sensibility. Our Master's in Cognitive Science is not a psychology degree, and it's not a step towards being a counsellor, but it is designed for those who like to think about scientific questions and philosophical questions and to combine those. So I'm very happy, if you email me, I'm very happy to provide further information about our Master's course. It's a fairly small program. We take historically about 12 students a year in, and it's jointly administered by our schools of computer science and philosophy. Now, at the start of this course, I suggested that there was something to be gained by looking sympathetically back at a discredited discipline, which is the discipline of alchemy. Alchemy we used that term to describe a whole bunch of activities that sought to gain control over materials, that sought to understand what substances are, that sought to understand how one substance can be turned into another, and how the material reality can be used to influence our lives for good or for evil. Now, alchemy doesn't really exist as a discipline anymore, certainly not a scientific discipline, but it did give rise to scientific disciplines, including, for example, chemistry, a lot of material science, and some psychoanalysis. There were many spin-offs from alchemy. So it was a heady time in which very many people with often poorly aligned goals tried out lots and lots of things with an intense, burning, inquiring spirit. That's not a bad way of understanding where cognitive science is right now. And remember, the future is a very big territory indeed. There's a lot left. We will not be finished this in your lifetime or mine. So I think that's a good point to wrap up this course. If you have enjoyed this course, feel free to let me know. I'm Fred Cummins at University College Dublin. You can reach me at fred.cummins@ucd.ie by email. I hope you've enjoyed the course. If you're a student taking this for credit at UCD, please leave me feedback. I would be very delighted to get that. That's all, folks.